Welcome to Books on Point. Shadow of Liberation explores in detail the twists, turns, contestations and compromises of the ANC's economic and social policy making, particularly during the transition era of the 1990s and the early years of democracy. I spoke to authors about the motivation behind the book.
We were curious about this. These perceptions 25 years after democracy, that things were not working, and that maybe some of the blame for this might have been the kind of compromises that were made in the negotiations, was a question. It was not it was not something that we had hard evidence to understand one way or the other. So Robbie and I, who've been friends for a while, and both of whom were involved in the struggle in different ways in the 1980s and early 90s, thought that maybe we should engage in a kind of evidence-based, a scholarly, objective analysis of what happened in the 1990s to understand where we are now in relation to that. And in order to look at this, one of the things that we discovered is that there was very little that we really knew about what happened in the 1990s. Of course, the television covered things at one level, but a lot of the critical decisions, whether it was on the economy or social policy or big other questions relating to land, etc., appeared to have been decided in bilaterals, in discussions between the ANC as the leading force in the opposition and the former government, in kind of committees or discussions that were not public and are very poorly recorded. So we didn't really have a record of what was going on. So I think, what inspired us was the sense that things haven't gone very well in the last 25 years in relation to economic and social policy, and that there were lots of things about, the compromises or the decisions made in the 90s that we didn't understand perfectly, or that we understood less than perfectly. And our objective was to really engage in an evidence-based investigation, a detailed scholarly investigation, talking to the people who were there, looking at the primary documentation, and to come to our own view as to the nature of this liberation and what it has delivered or failed to deliver.
Speaking of that documentation, Robert, you mentioned in the book as well that economic and social policy was absent when it comes to ANC history right up until you encountered for the first time in a document called African Claims. Not a lot of people would know what African Claims is. They may have an idea of what the Freedom Charter was, but let's talk a little bit about African Claims. What was it?
So African Claims emerged out of war years and thinking about a post-segregation society. Of course, at that time, South Africa was still run by the segregationist minority regime run by white Jan Smuts. And in the context of the war, the Allied forces, those were opposed to fascism and Nazism, assembled a document called the Atlantic Charter. And essentially, the Atlantic Charter was about saying, well, if we're fighting fascism and we want to look at the societies of Nazism, what future vision do we have of a new global world? And two key features of the global world was the extension of democratization and the extension of social welfare. It's the first time in world history that you had a commitment globally to extending social welfare across the world. And it was the genius of specifically a thinker within the ANC, who was also the leader at the time, Dr. David Kumar, to take that document and say, well, this actually is absolutely relevant for the struggles of black people in South Africa for emancipation. Let's write up our own particular response to this document. And this document took the form of African Claims. And African Claims was personally the first place where the ANC unequivocally states its commitment that it's fighting for a non-racial democratic society, underpinned by social policies that would be universal. So every citizen, regardless of their social status, would have access to health, education, welfare, and so forth. And that's in the Bill of Rights in this document. So this document is incredibly significant because it's where the modern ANC, the ANC of the 1940s, puts forward its ideas of a South African good society. And it talks about a series of proposals that are about creating a far more egalitarian society that we have. And it clearly articulates ideas that cumulatively are unequivocally social democratic. And of course, at the same time, globally, you find a lot of social democratic thinking is happening. There's a lot of influence of thinkers, particularly from the Labour government of Clement Attlee, who chaperoned in the new welfare state in Britain in the post-war period. And there was this huge ferment in society at the time that we want to rid our societies of Nazism and fascism, and what do we want to replace it by? And the strategic genius of David Kuma and the group working with him, and it's very important to say that the group working with him were leading African intellectuals of the period engaged in the liberation movement. They include, for example, people like Governor Mbeki, a range of thinkers across the political spectrum within the black liberation movement aligned to the Congress tradition of the ANC. So this is where you get a very firm statement by the ANC that we have ideas of what this new society needs to look like. And here's the ideas we are championing for post-segregation society. And of course those ideas do not come to fruition because then Smuts' government is threatened by this new social change implied by the implementation of this document. And of course the segregation legislation becomes more draconian before apartheid is introduced, and basically those proposals are completely torpedoed. But this document, African Claims, is perhaps for me the first significant statement by the ANC that is fighting for a social democratic state.
And then we have 1955, where the Freedom Charter is produced. And fast forward a few years, you get to 1961, where the ANC is now a banned organization, and a lot of the comrades are now in exile. And it is in this context where, now from a viewer's perspective, do you get the evidence from your research and the work that you've done that in those periods of exile, there was debate about economic policy, about social policy, about where we see South Africa going when we are liberated? Do you get that sense?
Well, the sense that you get, and it's completely understandable, is that especially in conditions of great repression and having been banned, the ANC refocuses its entire post-1961 strategy to reposition itself. It has to market itself, in a sense, to the world. It has to raise new resources. It has to project its kind of, its mandate, its objectives to the world in a very hostile environment. And its main focus in this world, and it's a Cold War era, it's important to understand that is the superpower rivalry that existed. The ANC has to kind of fashion an existence outside of South Africa largely, although it had obviously a strong presence here underground. It has to focus its attention on its major objective, and that is the seizure of state power. How does the ANC actually take over this illegitimate government? So the entire focus of its existence is on that, whether it is armed struggle or sanctions, on internal resistance. What are the combination of strategies that and what kind of support does it need to realize this goal of taking over state power? In that context, questions relating to the economy, social policy get completely relegated. And we say that not as in a completely as if this is not understandable. It is understandable that kind of prioritization of its goals would occur. What we say is that there are consequences. There were some very difficult outcomes because of that failure to even consider economic questions. So that when 1990 happens, you have to ask, what does the ANC actually stand for in terms of the economy? Suddenly, the prospect of becoming the government of the day has been foreshortened. Unexpectedly, perhaps, maybe people didn't think that it's going to happen as quickly as it did, but suddenly the reality of governing becomes, into view, if you like. And the ANC has to scramble around to try and make some kind of view. Now, it's fair to say that in the early 90s, the early 80s, in Lusaka, the ANC did set up something called the Department of Economic Planning. But as all the records show, and the people like Paula Jordan and so on that we interviewed, it wasn't really focused on hard economic issues. It was, they had seminars on the economy to some extent. They had invited speakers from London and so on. But it was not really tackling the hard issues about what kind of economy, what kind of macroeconomic policy framework South Africa should have after liberation.
Robert, what do you hope people get out of this book?
We want people to be enthused about how they can, again, through political engagement and understanding how we've got to the mess that we're in to some degree, re-engage in the political life of the country so we can decouple ourselves to the agenda which we originally fought for, the lost agenda, which is for us the social change agenda embedded in the Freedom Charter and articulated and modernized in a new form. We have to go back to our traditional values and principles, which is sorely lacking in our current era. And this book tries to account for why we've come to the point where those values have been eschewed. And it's a hope that people's engagement with the book, reading all the new evidence that's available in this book, and it's a riveting read, we'd also want to say, because we talk about actors, institutions, and so forth, how they interacted, that maybe it will help to lead, perhaps optimistically, to a renaissance in the ANC about reclaiming those values that so many of our comrades, like for me, Ashley Kriel, Solomon Mashlangu, Sepiwe Tukulu, a range of people died for.
Well, we have more news with Nompumelelo Siziba at the top of the hour. That's goodbye from me until next time.